Ever get that feeling like someone's watching you, even when you can't see them? I know I have, and it always sends chills down my spine. Makes you wonder, is it more than just our senses messing with us?
Yeah.
Especially for us as Catholics, it feels like there could be a spiritual side to it, you know?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? And yeah, as Catholics, we do tend to look for the spiritual side of things. But before we go there, maybe we should talk about what science says about how we notice when people are looking at us. We've got some articles here about how people perceive gazes, and even one from Forbes that talks about the science behind it.
So, how does science explain that feeling of being watched? Is there really a way our bodies can sense someone looking at us, even if we don't see them?
Well, our brains are really good at picking up on little cues, even if someone's not right in front of us. Our peripheral vision can see movement and changes in light, and that can tell us if someone's looking in our direction.
So it's like our brains are always looking out for danger or stuff that's interesting.
Exactly. And it makes sense if you think about, evolution, right? If our ancestors could quickly spot a predator or someone who wanted to fight them, they were more likely to survive. So we've evolved to be super sensitive to anything that might mean someone's paying attention to us.
Wow, that's amazing. But then why do we sometimes feel like we're being watched when no one's actually looking at us? Like when you feel someone's eyes on you, but then you turn around and no one's there?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. See, even though our brains are good at picking up on these subtle hints, they're not perfect. Our emotions, especially when we're anxious, can change how we see things. Like if we're already feeling anxious or nervous, we might think random things are signs that we're being watched, even when it's just our imagination.
Oh, so it's like our own anxiety is making those small cues seem bigger, so we think we're being watched when really it's just us freaking ourselves out.
Exactly. And this is where the science starts to bump into something a little more mysterious. What about those times when you feel watched and it's not just your senses or your anxiety? Could there be a spiritual reason for that feeling?
That's what I'm really curious about. We believe in the soul as Catholics, and it seems like there could be a connection there. Could our souls be sensitive to other people looking at us in a way that's beyond our five senses?
Now you're getting to the heart of it. And this is where Catholic thinkers, like St. Thomas Aquinas, have some really interesting ideas. In fact, Aquinas even talked about what he called the sensitive soul and how it interacts with the world around us.
Oh, okay. So what exactly did he mean by sensitive soul? And how does that connect to this feeling of being watched?
Well, Aquinas said that the soul isn't just some abstract spiritual thing. It's really connected to our bodies and how we experience the world. He described the sensitive soul as a bridge between our physical senses and our higher intelligence. It's the part of us that takes in information from the world and lets us feel things like pleasure, pain, and even subtler things, like that feeling of being watched.
So what you're saying is that Aquinas is saying our soul isn't just sitting there, it's actively involved in how we experience the world, even on a basic sensory level.
Exactly. And he even said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the sensitive soul is like the form of the body. He saw the soul and body as totally intertwined, not separate things.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does this sensitive soul explain that feeling of being watched? Is Aquinas suggesting that our souls can actually sense when other people are looking at us, even if our physical senses don't pick it up?
That's a really good question. And to be honest, Aquinas didn't specifically answer that in his writing. But his ideas definitely open up the possibility that there's a spiritual side to how we perceive gazes. If our souls are so connected to our bodies and senses, it's not too crazy to think that they might also be sensitive to spiritual energies or intentions directed at us, like when someone's really focused on us with their gaze. And don't forget, Aquinas was big on how everything's connected. So it's possible that our souls, being part of that web, could be sensitive to the spiritual energy coming from another person, especially when they're really focused on us. It's like when you feel someone's bad vibes even before they say anything.
Oh, totally. I've definitely had that happen. You can just tell they're in a bad mood or something before they even open their mouth.
Yeah.
So are we saying that this sensitive soul could be picking up on those subtle spiritual cues even from far away?
It's definitely something to think about. And that actually brings us to another cool thing about Catholic teaching that might help us understand all this. The communion of saints. We believe that everyone who believes, whether they're alive now or they've passed away, is united in this mystical body, all connected through Christ.
Yeah, and through that communion, we can pray for each other and even ask the saints in heaven to help us out. But how does this connect to that feeling of being watched?
Well, If we're all spiritually linked through this communion, it makes sense that our souls could be sensitive to the prayers and intentions of other people, even if they're not physically there. Think about someone praying really hard for you, sending you good energy and thoughts. Could that focused spiritual attention create a feeling that you're being watched, even if you can't see them?
Wow, that's a beautiful idea. It makes you wonder if some of those times when you feel watched and can't explain it could actually be someone praying for us and like spiritually embracing us.
Exactly. And it fits with how Catholics understand the spiritual world. It's more interconnected and active than we often realize. But of course, we have to be careful. Not every time you feel watched is a spiritual thing.
Right, right. We can't forget that there are normal explanations for a lot of these things, like what we talked about earlier with our peripheral vision and anxiety messing with us. But it's those times when it feels like something more, something you just can't explain, that really get you thinking. And that's when what the church teaches can give us some really interesting insights.
Totally. And we can't forget that the church also says that there are spiritual beings, both good and bad, that can interact with us in ways we might not fully get. And that leads us to the whole angels and demons thing, which can be a little, well, creepy to think about.
Okay, gotta admit, this is where things start to get a little spooky for me. But I'm also curious, how do angels and demons fit into all this talk about feeling watched?
So, in Catholic tradition, each of us has a guardian angel who's supposed to protect and guide us throughout our lives. They're always watching over us, praying for us to God. So, could it be that sometimes, maybe when we're in danger or need to make a good decision, our guardian angel might let us know they're there by making us feel like we're being watched?
So it's like they're giving us a little nudge, a spiritual heads up to pay attention to what's around us or to choose the right path.
Exactly. But then there's the other side of it. We have to remember that there are also demonic forces that might try to mess with us. Demons, well, they're all about tricking us and making us suffer. They might try to make us scared, anxious, or even paranoid. And one way they might do that is by making us feel like someone's watching us all the time, even when we're alone.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of scary. But it also makes sense. If demons are real and they want to mess up our peace and pull us away from God, it makes sense that they would use mind games like that. But how can we tell if it's our guardian angel watching over us or a demon trying to freak us out?
That's where we need to use discernment. As Catholics, we're supposed to test the spirits, like St. John said in his letter. We need to pay attention to how the experience makes us feel. Does that feeling of being watched make you feel closer to God? Does it give you peace, comfort, and a sense of being loved and protected? Or does it make you scared, anxious, and feel alone and hopeless?
That's helpful. So if feeling watched comes with good spiritual vibes, it might be a sign of God's grace, maybe our guardian angel or a loved one in heaven looking out for us. But if it brings bad feelings and messes with us spiritually, it could be a sign of something bad.
Right. It's about looking at the whole picture, the feelings that come with it, and what you learn spiritually from it. And of course, if you're not sure, talk to a spiritual director or a priest. They can help you figure out what's going on and give you good spiritual advice.
That's good advice. So we've covered a lot, from the science of how we notice when people are looking at us to Aquinas' ideas about the sensitive soul, and even how angels and demons might be involved. But now I'm wondering, what does all this mean for our everyday lives? How does understanding this feeling of being watched change how we live?
Well, I think one of the big things to take away is that we need to be more aware of, like, our spiritual surroundings. We often go through life not even thinking about the unseen forces that are at work, both good and bad. But all this talk about feeling watched reminds us that we're not alone. There's a whole spiritual world around us that's always interacting with us, whether we realize it or not.
So it's about developing a sense of spiritual awareness, like being more in tune with those subtle cues and feelings that might be trying to tell us something.
Yeah, exactly. And that awareness can really change how we live. It can make us more thankful for our guardian angel, more attentive to people's prayers, and better at recognizing the things that are influencing our thoughts and feelings.
It's like we're developing a spiritual radar, learning to pick up on the signals from the unseen world.
That's a great way to put it. And as we get more spiritually tuned in, we might find that those times when we feel watched become less about being scared and more about a feeling of connection and guidance.
That's a comforting thought. But it also makes me wonder, if we can be so sensitive to the spiritual attention of others, does that mean we should be more careful about how we look at other people?
Oh, that's a great point. It really shows how important it is to have good intentions and to be careful about our thoughts and desires. If our souls can sense the spiritual energy behind someone's gaze, then our own gazes must have a similar impact, right?
So we should try to look at others with love, compassion, and respect, knowing that our gaze might be communicating more than just what our eyes are seeing.
Exactly. And maybe we should also be more aware of what we're looking at in general. Are we focusing on things that uplift and inspire us? Or are we filling our minds with stuff that brings us down and makes us more vulnerable to bad influences?
It really makes you think about how important it is to guard our senses, not just for moral reasons, but for spiritual ones too.
Absolutely. It's all connected. Our physical senses, our emotions, our thoughts, and our spiritual well-being are all intertwined. And understanding that can help us make choices that lead to holiness and wholeness in every part of our lives.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive. We've talked about the science behind how we notice gazes, dug into what Aquinas said about the sensitive soul, thought about the roles of angels and demons, and even touched on the communion of saints. It's incredible how much depth there is to this simple experience of feeling watched.
It really is. And I think it shows how beautiful and complex our Catholic faith is. It embraces both science and spirituality, recognizing that they're not opposed to each other, but can actually work together and help us understand each other better.
So next time you get that feeling that someone's watching you, take a second to stop and think. Could it be your guardian angel looking out for you, a loved one praying for you, or maybe even the Holy Spirit gently guiding you on your path?